Hey bro, I think you should lose it. You might die in the future. Just look at me, man. I'm tall, dark, subjective. I don't care if you never English. Guys, I'm perfect. If I lose weight, all of you might lose your girlfriends.
What's up? So, first 42 minutes, Anirudh is discussing his life as a young cop lawyer. And I know Anirudh a bit personally also. And he's one of the most articulate people and one of the most patient people. Like when he speaks with you, he speaks so clearly. The way he's explained the nature of his work and the difference between the dispute side and the transaction side, it's beautiful. And last 20 minutes we discuss blockchains and cryptos. So I really hope you stick around for that. Also, just a disclaimer, like it's not a tutorial as to how to get a tier 1 job, but if you click on that subscribe button, then I'm telling you, you'll definitely get a tier 1 job. I mean, you'll be making millions. I'm telling you. Like, I have no personal interest when I say that. But if you click on that button, your life will change.
No, don't be a lawyer. What about human rights law? No money, no money. Environmental law? No money, even less money. Immigration law? No money, plus it's a bummer. Okay, but what if one day you make it to the Supreme Court? It'd be great to be on the Supreme Court, but you'll never be.
Hey
on
guys,
the
what's
Supreme
up? Welcome
Court.
to another
There's
episode of Fun
truly
with
no
Law.
chance
Today
of
I have
that
a
happening.
very dear guest, and
Don't be a lawyer.
we share a very common, I don't know how to say that, but common mentor, Advocate Lipun Saxena. This is how I know Anirudh. And today I have Anirudh Goteti with me, and he's a graduate from NLU Jodhpur, currently working at LNL Partners, formerly known as Luthra and Luthra. And yeah, and he's a tech law enthusiast, and I'm very grateful that you were there on such a short notice, and thanks a lot for your presence.
No worries. A pleasure to be here, Judge.
Thank you. So, all right, take it away, man. What's your current profile? What are you up to these days?
Right. So I work at Luthra and Luthra Law Offices,
Yeah.
or LNL Partners, it's called, and you've given me a really nice introduction. I work with the mergers and acquisitions team at Luthra, and my team also does a lot of insolvency work, which is to say the insolvency and bankruptcy code. On the mergers and acquisition side, we do a lot of work which involves private equity funds and venture capital funds looking to invest money into funds in India, funds or other companies and platforms, and get a return on the investment eventually. So that involves a lot of complex issues of not only company law, but foreign exchange related issues, RBI issues, which are two of the biggest things, right?
Yeah.
Apart from that, any deal would start with a legal due diligence, which would involve us checking the compliances across most laws, to be your intellectual property, your real estate, your licenses, material contracts, uh, labor laws, which is something that's been in the news these days, and a lot of host of these laws. Post that, we get into negotiations where the documents, legal documents, the investment agreements, the share purchase, the shareholder agreements are executed. So this is our bread and butter at a general corporate team or a M&A team at a law firm. Apart from this, something that I take great interest in is in insolvency law, the IBC, and I've taken an interest in it right from law school. But I realized that I cannot solely focus on insolvency because while it is a fledgling field of law, it may not exactly be something you can have your practice solely focused on.
Yes.
And I had enjoyed my corporate internships before that.
Yeah.
So getting a good mix of both is something I'm really fortunate to be in. Yeah.
So, Anirudh, there are a lot of perceptions around tier 1 law firms. So, essentially, the aim of this episode is to get them clear. So, first of all, tell me,
Yeah.
what is your typical week like? What are the working hours like? And what is exactly the firm culture and things like that?
Yeah, correct. So I'll tell you about my work culture, but apart from that, it's important. So I'm assuming the audience for our show will be young law students or people who are fresh into the field and want to make a decision, right? Uh, my first advice would be do what you like. Right? Now, corporate law and the right word to be used should be transactional law, and litigation or disputes is very different. So think of it as a breaking point, right? Where parties make a relation. So everything leading up to parties creating a legal relation, all the diligence, compliances. So if I want to buy a company in a commercial sense, I want to buy shares in yours, Jalaj's company, then I will hire a corporate law firm, a transactional law firm, which will review the contracts that we enter into, compliances that your company is doing, not doing. Are you paying your employees? Are you following safety procedures in the factories? Is what something a corporate law firm would do. So this is everything leading up to making that relationship. Once that relationship breaks apart, say I stop paying you money that I was supposed to under the contract, then we get into the disputes phase, which may go into arbitration, negotiations, mediation, court, ultimately. And that is what disputes lawyers handle, and then they argue in front of courts. So that is the fundamental difference between corporate law and this. Obviously, in court you have more face time with judges, public speaking, and in corporate there's more backroom negotiation between corporates and clients and lawyers and your accountants. Both are very different fields, but very interesting. You think of them as completely separate worlds, and in one sense they are, but everything is very interlinked. In fact, case laws that we see on, say, the Contract Act or insolvency, and so the next time in drafting a contract, we'll be mindful of what was the outcome of that one case or that arbitration, so that we can have safeguards in that. So everything's interlinked while they operate in separate fields. So that is one thing. Your graduates should do something they like, right? Not necessarily go for something because they perceive it to be more glamorous. And your work hours are maybe as bad in both fields. It's just how you deal with it. Now, if you want to talk about my typical week, throughout the year, any law firm is very cyclic, right? So depending on the team you're in, if you're in banking, for example, I don't do banking law, but every quarter there's a closing. So every 3 month cycle, the end of the 3 month cycle is hell for banking lawyers, and they have long nights where they're working till 5, 6 in the morning because the work has to be done. The other 2 months might be chill. Same thing with my corporate thing. There are investment cycles usually in the market. So we may have 2, 3 months where there's not a lot of work. Then suddenly there's a rush of. So in a good week, I may be so I come into office at 10 and I leave office by 7:38 on a good day. So that's about 10 hours of work on an average day. On a good day. On a bad day, it can go up to 14, 16 hours of work, and weekends as well. And I don't think this is any less than what a litigating lawyer does. It was just that you can go out to court, but here you're sitting in office. So everything has a set of challenges, and you will get used to it. There's not much you should give thought to.
But asking the question, as a lot of practicing lawyers, in disputes, they have that arrogance, that people who sit in offices are not real lawyers and things like that, and you're not going to the bar and things. How do you deal with that? Like, but because I have seen you have equally. So you have interned with SAM, you have interned with NDA, you have interned with Badwa, you have interned with I don't know how many litigation firms, you have interned with so many places. You've seen both sides. So do you feel sometimes that you miss that action or things like that?
I don't know. So my objective of doing these many internships was to get a perspective of how different offices work, and this is something I suggest people do. Instead of finding what you want to do, find out what you don't want to do for sure.
Exactly.
Right? If you eliminate things you're certain you don't want to do or don't want to do right now, your decisions become a lot easier, is what I feel. Like in an MCQ paper, if you don't know the answer, 3 are wrong, the fourth one has to be right. Right? It's not that simple in life and in law. but you can follow a similar practice. So I've tried to, in the legal field, kept my internships varied.
Yeah.
And joining a corporate law firm was a conscious choice on my part, because one thing is to intern, but till I give it a try actually and have that responsibility thrust on me, I can't really make that call.
Yes.
And I'm enjoying my work. The reason I did is because I enjoy the subject matter. Commercial law, whether it's transactional or in disputes, is something that I'm deeply interested in.
Yeah.
So my choice had become simpler towards the end of my law school,
Yeah.
when placements were around the corner.
No, I'm sure in like by fourth, fifth year, you were like family law तो नहीं कर सकते. So
For sure.
yeah. No, I was
Yeah.
reading Nariman's biography. You know, the senior Palias Nariman, and he said in his initial years of practice, when he was bored in court and there was no work, he used to go and sit with in family law courts. He said they were very entertaining and there was no knowledge of law required. All right, so Anirudh, you're from Delhi, right? Can you tell 2-3 points about your journey? Turning points, things like that.
Right. So you asked me what my turning points have been.
Yeah.
It's tough, right? Because it's a journey. Like,
Yeah.
My entire law school experience has shaped me and my decisions.
Yeah.
So to say that there were a couple of points would be hard to pinpoint.
Yeah.
But I think the first turning point would be one where I decided to do law after class 12, because I wasn't really certain that I wanted to do anything. I didn't know what I wanted.
Yeah.
So I wrote exams. I applied to Delhi University. I applied entrance exams for management colleges, law colleges,
You
everything.
seem like a commerce student, no? है ना? Commerce है ना?
No, I was science, bro, throughout.
अच्छा, oh.
I had PCMB. I want to be a doctor.
Oh God.
Yeah, thank God, like I didn't go through with it. In fact, like in class 11, my life was miserable. I decided science is not something I wanted to do. So I decided, chalo, like I know I should have taken humanities, but we'll take
Yeah.
it. And I went with law, and I'm very happy I made the decision, because I always debated back in school.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of tech quizzing and like
All right.
discussions and all that stuff. So I was always into tech right from a young age, and public speaking, debating. So
Yes.
I think doing law was kind of a no-brainer, which really didn't strike me at that point. So that was a turning point. Second was when I got into NLU Jodhpur, one of the premier institutes in the country. So I mean, more than anything else, of course, the administration and teachers may not be great across your law schools, right? But I think it's the student
Yeah.
community. You surround yourself with
Yeah.
smart people, like
You learn from your peers, right? You learn, yeah, because there's so many people doing so well around you, especially when you look at your seniors. Like, I think it's just a culture ki, all right, these things happen, so even you explore a lot. And obviously, with now COVID classes going online, so the competency of professors is seen, and they're not ready to send us online lectures because they're scared we'll circulate them.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So, what was your biggest failure? I get a very interesting answer to these questions. I ask that to everyone. Instead of asking their success, ask about their failure.
Dude, this is like a job interview. Huh?
No, man. Like, but honestly,
this is also my Lutheran interview, honestly.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, there's no. Again, this comes back to my turning point thing. Like of course, like no one does anything perfect. No one charts their course perfectly. They always have missteps along the way. So I don't see anything as a particular failure, but you see failure as a learning point, because only when you know you did something wrong can you do it right.
Yeah, exactly.
Nothing you do right on the first go, and nothing like. If I could look back and say I could do something differently, would be to say that maybe my first year I could have worked a little harder. I took life very simply in my first year at law school. Because I realized there's so much time that you have in law school. Like you have classes for like 6 hours, 5 hours. And then for the rest of the day, you don't have to do anything if you don't have a submission or a test coming up.
Yeah.
Like you can do all the socializing you want, all the illegal activities, that as they call it.
Yeah.
Not saying that I indulge in it, but if you wanted to.
Of course, no. Of course, Anirudh. you will never indulge in these things.
Of course, right?
Yeah.
And partying and all of it.
Yeah.
And like, but we sleep, right? I'm saying if I could change something, would be like my first year where I could have worked a little harder, but everything worked out in the end. I have no complaints about
Yeah.
my experience at law school. But yeah,
Alright. No, but see, NLU Jodhpur, I don't know why you're saying that in first year also there wasn't much pressure, because when I compare to GNLU, I believe our colleges come up because there is so much free time to do that students do good things. Because imagine, we literally now have around 4.5 hours of classes. That's all. We don't have those cyclic summation. We only have one continuous, one mid-sem, one end-sem.
yeah.
So I'm sure, and plus you're being modest, like especially to crack after having PCMB. I mean, hats off to you, man. Just last question about your journey. How was NLU Jodhpur, like the experience? Because I'm from GNLU, so like I would want people to know more about NLU Jodhpur and how is it like, things like that.
I mean, one advantage NU Jodhpur has over any place
Yeah.
is that we get our individual rooms right from the beginning.
Yeah.
Right from our first year, everyone gets their own room in the hostel. So that is such an underappreciated thing, because now I don't think I can share my room with anybody.
Yeah.
Because of how used to I am.
Yeah.
So you had the camaraderie of your friends who are all on the same floor or whatever, the hostel, but then you had your own space when you wanted to get back.
Yeah.
That's one thing. But otherwise, NU Jodhpur has been great, and as we briefly discussed earlier, it's not the teachers or the faculty or the administration that makes it great. It's a peer community.
Yeah.
And the bonds that you form with people at any place. And if you surround, NU Jodhpur has great alumni. When I got in, I had some great seniors who I learned a lot from.
Yeah.
So I always look back on my experience, say, oh, I learned so much from so and so person, people, experiences that I was put in. So I don't think the law school is good. That's a problem with Indian law schools. So students are not becoming smart because the law school is giving effort. Right? So it's a very bottom-up thing in
Yeah.
in an NLU. Because your students coming in are smart through a highly competitive CLAT exam.
Yeah.
Because all your students are coming in are smart, they will work hard and do well.
Yeah.
And that is what happens at NLUs, because NLUs don't invest much in education. Something I see with Jindal is that it's easier to get into,
Yeah.
but because they're investing so much into their teaching infrastructure, is that people otherwise who might not have been academically inclined end up doing well.
Yeah.
And that is the problem with university education in India. You
Yeah.
don't get good education anywhere. A
Yeah.
university is good because its students do well. It's never that the students are doing well because the
Yeah.
institution
That's true.
imparting that knowledge for them to be smart.
Yeah.
That is a big problem.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you on that fact, because that is what I always advocate for also. For example, for an average student like me, like average as in, average तो नहीं बोलूँगा अपने आप को सबके सामने, but no, for a decent student like me, if I'm not at top of my class, if I go to an NLU, automatically, because there are people around me doing so much, I automatically end up doing a lot. But for example, if someone is already a class topper, they will do, I think, better at a place like Jindal because of the more resources that they will have. So
Yeah. Correct.
yeah. So I always say that if you are a decent student and you realize that in 11th, 12th grade that you're not the best, you should aim for these colleges so that at least wo bheed mein you'll get first. Also, now last question: do you ever feel that your law school life was quite predictable? Because going in your first, second year, pata hai, like right? Okay, I'm getting decent marks. ठीक है, mood kar raha hai, sab ho raha hai, so I might just I'll work for a tier one. Like, do you feel it's quite predictable, or were there anything like shit? Yeah, you can, because I have a lot of these stories. I'll tell you sometime later. But do you have anything?
I mean, yeah, like, when you're first year
Yeah.
and you come into college, people say, oh, there's only one part to success, is that tum padhai karo, get good grades,
Yeah.
mood karo,
Yeah.
do your internships, and then eventually you land that high-paying corporate job.
Yeah.
And Luthra, which hires a lot from NLU Jodhpur,
Yeah.
should turn it may seem like I took a very predictable path,
Yeah.
like a lot of people do. And if I did something because I wanted to do it,
Yeah.
of course, the factors around me obviously pushed me towards doing things that people said
Yeah.
are the decent things to do. But I've realized, like, I see people in my own batch or like juniors
Yeah.
who did different things they wanted to do. Like, some people say, oh, mooting is the only way to success. It is not. I mooted, but I know people who don't moot, who debate well, who do negotiations well, who are doing well in whatever they're doing. So there's no one sure shot path to success. Like, everyone might reach this point in the map like this, like this, like this at different times.
Yeah.
But everyone has to be given the choice to make their own journey they want to do it. So yeah, I look back, I see I maybe followed a predictable path in law school, but I have solace in knowing that I could have done things differently if I wanted to.
Yeah.
And I chose to do it this way.
And I think this was an attack question at the end. Attack. You're predictable. All right. Now I want you to talk more about internships, because I think I have, like, whatever conversation we have had, I believe you have some mad amount of clarity in life. Because even when I intern, a lot of my friends ask why you keep interning, because they say I do it for the CV. Because even I have done some 7-8 internships, and I'm just
Yeah.
in the third year. And you have done 14 internships. Yesterday I counted.
So wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I haven't kept that count, but I'll tell you why I did these many internships.
Yeah.
So, okay, first of all, that notion that doing X number of internships helps your CV,
Yeah.
it probably doesn't. It
Right.
doesn't help you as much as you think it would. Say if you're looking for a corporate job, if you've done like 3-4 internships, maybe even 2 internships. I know people who haven't done corporate internships and landed their job on days, right?
Yeah.
For me, it was more about learning. Like, if I first of all, I thought I wasted enough time in college. So
Yeah.
the 1.5-2 months I got for break between semesters, I should use it productively and not sleep. Because
Yes.
literally, when I come back home and once you start college, your
Yeah.
parents stop telling you anything. Like in school, they're like, पढ़ लो बेटा. But now college में छुट्टी में आया हूँ, मैं क्या पढ़ूंगा? There are no assignments yet.
Yeah.
So for me, to keep me motivated to wake up in the morning, it was important for me to go out and work something. Of
Yeah.
course, if I didn't go on a short trip somewhere, that was one, to keep myself occupied. Second, I did a legal field, and I told you how it's about eliminating things you don't want
Yes.
to do. So my first internship was with the human rights
Yeah.
HRL. It was more of a human rights advocacy.
That's a brilliant internship. I think HRLN is one internship you can do in your 5th year also, I've heard.
Yeah, for sure. And it's perfect for first year because they
Yeah.
don't tell you to do a lot of legal work. You see the ropes around how a court works. They took me to tribunals. I went to the NGTA. I went to the Supreme Court. I went to high courts. I went to district courts everywhere. And the first year, you just want to get up. So I would leave office by 5 o'clock in the evening. I'm like, oh my God, such a long day. And now that I've started working, I'm like, oh, 9 o'clock. Oh, an early day. That's fun.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. You learn the ropes around how different organizations work and
Yeah.
what to expect out of different things. Second, you get to meet a lot of people, right? We're in a small field. The legal community is a very incestuous field. You might think that you go into corporate law, you won't need litigators. But
Incestuous.
tomorrow, if you get into an issue,
Yeah.
you will call those very lawyers. I've seen people I worked with at courts and they remembered me from the internships. So
Yeah,
it's good to know people and learn the ropes around offices. But yeah, only if you want to do it. I'm not advocating people go ahead and do 14 internships across
Yeah.
the 5 years in law school. It can be madness at times. You should do it as much as you want to do.
Yeah.
And then secondly, for me, being from Delhi, it's an advantage. A lot of people who are not from Delhi, Bombay, go to Delhi, Bombay to intern. So not only is that additional time, effort, energy, money that you spend,
Yeah.
it's also draining staying away from home when you've already spent 6 months in the hostel, 4 months in the hostel. So for me, being in Delhi, staying at home was a great advantage, but allowed me to do these many internships.
Yeah.
I would say.
No, I remember when I met you for the first time. So Nipun sir asked you, "How's the internship?" And you gave a very, I don't want to say cocky, but you said this. Well, after doing 12-13 internship, पहले दिन में ही समझ आ जाता है internship कैसी होगी.
Oh
And
no, I do not remember this. You're putting words in my mouth.
you said that, but yeah, man, like no, because internships, it's very important the point that you make about elimination and especially about knowing people. For example, this is my 14th episode, right? So with you, 14th or 15th episode that I'm recording. So all the people that I have interviewed before or something, at least half of the guests were either someone from previous internships. I met you through an internship. So you keep meeting people. That's how you connect.
Hmm.
Because the only way to network in this field is when you add value to someone. So when you intern with someone, no, they always remember you. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Also,
Yeah, and
yeah. Please go ahead. Sorry.
no, there's another internship. You should not be a fly on the wall in an internship. If you're doing an internship, do it with full seriousness, not just you want to go and sit in an office.
Yeah.
So I would like to think that when I entered a place, the people, even the supreme bosses, remembered me for something that I value that I added or some discussion that I had with them.
Yeah.
So wherever you do, give your best. And if you're not giving your best, take rest completely. Like even if you're resting or sleeping, do it at 100%. There's no point giving even 80% to sleep. Okay, give your 100% to sleep. If you're having rest, like have the best rest of your life.
Yeah.
And if you're interning, then make sure you work at least 90% capacity, mental, physical, everything. I think it's important to do your best wherever you.
Plus, I think one tip I would like to give to the viewers. So a lot of interns you will see, and I've seen people with best of colleges. So they will go and they will be in a firm or they will be in a setup where there are a lot of hierarchy. So they will only interact with their immediate superiors. So they won't even meet the guy on the top till the last day. So the least you could do is at least on the first day only just go ahead, step inside the cabin, knock, and just introduce yourself. Because I think that helps a lot because at least they know, okay, this guy is working, and they always want. And a lot of people who are older, they want to interact with young blood. Like they find them quite interesting to have fun with them and things like that. First of all, tell me, why do you think? What is the logic behind not paying juniors like well? When I say well, I don't mean 1 lakh or 75,000. I'm just paying minimum just to survive in a city. Like there are juniors who work for free. And I understand that logic, that knowledge is the true gain, but no, labor laws and things like that. Don't you feel like mistreated when you're not paid properly for your work?
No, so I think law as a field, how do you say, struggles with the problem of nepotism, right? They assume everyone coming in. So if you look at the Bombay Council, I'll give an example because I think Bombay has it worse.
Yeah.
Okay. Bombay High Court. Senior advocates do not pay their juniors even 1 rupee. In Delhi, at least, you might make very little money, but at least you're paid some money. The older breed of Bombay advocates say that they do not want to pay because you're learning from us. It's like extended tuition. So why we are not going to pay you? Because what you learn in our chambers is the actual value that we are giving.
Yeah.
But that happens only when you live in that city or are privileged enough. Even if you're not a lawyer, you should be privileged enough that your parents want, after putting you through 5 years of law school, right? Your parents are willing to give you another 5-6 years of support of your living expenses if you want to make it big in litigation. And what if you fail? Right? No one has answers to this. So I think it's highly unethical that unions aren't paid or are paid pittance. Right? Are paid a pittance. It's wrong, but I think that it's slightly changing. Delhi is obviously way better than Bombay in that regard, and which is surprising. Living expenses in Bombay are bonkers compared to Delhi.
Because the court is in town. The court is in town, right? So you can't live in Navi Mumbai. You have to live somewhere close by.
Exactly. But people do travel from Navi Mumbai in the local trains. They spend 2 hours in the morning each way.
Yeah.
So if you're spending 4 hours traveling and then whatever you're working, then how are you going to do it? So the only people who will get ahead are your second generation lawyers, or people who live in town. If you live in town, you're already privileged enough.
Yes.
So it's bad. So I think there is a younger breed of lawyers that's coming up, and there are more of them today than there was say 2 years ago. It's changing, right? Who are paying, who see the value in say young graduates who are smart and willing to work hard and want to make a name for themselves, who may be first generation lawyers, who are paying well, who are paying the juniors well. There are very few of them, but there are opportunities if you really want to.
You don't have a legal background, right?
No.
So-
my grandfather is a lawyer, in
Okay.
fact, but he didn't go to court or anything. He's went to a bank and went to a managerial job. Yeah,
All right.
legal.
Yeah. So, did you have to don't you feel that you have to work harder in general? Because, first of all, that's what my point with nepotism is, right? Like, people are crazy about Bollywood nepotism, which, matlab, you don't see nepotism in 40 other places, like law and and I think nepotism, I know it's bad, but the thing is, it's there. Like, you can't do anything about it because today, if my children, like, if I'm 20 years later, if my children sees me, see me being a lawyer, I won't say don't do it. Like, obviously, the path will be easier. So, do you feel you have to work harder sometimes?
See, I think if you want to make it, anyone has to work hard. Whether
Okay.
you're a first generation lawyer, second generation lawyer, if you want to, depending on how well you want to do, you have to work hard.
Yeah.
At that level, correct? So I don't think I'm working particularly harder. I would have worked the same amount had I had a legal background. Say my father or my uncle was a lawyer. But that's just me.
All right.
I also know people who take it very simple because their father is a lawyer and they know that they're going to get clients from them.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest challenge for a lawyer starting out, especially litigation, is how to build a clientele. One thing is to learn. You work with a counsel for 4, 5, 6, 10 years. You learn your ropes around the court and your own experience at court. You learn.
Yeah.
Correct. But how do you build a clientele? How do you make a name for yourself? That problem is eliminated for a second generation or a third generation lawyer. So they have to work less in the sense that they don't have to work harder to be known. Whereas I think if you're a first generation lawyer, you have to work harder to be known and build that clientele around you.
That's it.
The struggle is there, but if you're second generation, the struggle is lesser. And in a corporate firm, it doesn't really matter because
Yeah.
the firm is giving you clients. So how hard you work and deal with people is what gets you through. So so my advice to any young graduate would be join a corporate firm only if you like it. I'm not saying you'll fail in litigation without a legal background.
Yeah.
You will need a little more push and support from your parents, I'm sure,
Yes.
because it won't be possible. Yeah. Or it will be way harder for you to do it. But coming back, if you're a first generation lawyer, a corporate law firm is simpler in the sense you don't have to work on your clientele as much because the firm is feeding your clients.
Yeah.
So only how good you are in a job and in interacting with people and clients is what gets you in.
Also, now, what are the unexpected skills you developed that you never thought even in your 5th year after you were placed that you would do? Like, when you look around, you said, "Oh, I'm becoming good at this. I never thought I would be in the past 1 year."
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I think time management and working with pressures, because in law school, no matter how much we complain about, oh, I only have 1 day for submission, like
हो
how
जाता
will I do it?
है.
Yeah, हो तो जाता है, quality नहीं रहता है.
हाँ, yeah,
But in law firms, you will do the same half a day with quality
yeah,
because you have to learn to deal with those pressures
yes,
and time management. Now, I never went to the gym in college, but now I've started gymming regularly and taking out time from my hectic schedule to do it. That's, I think, because of how regimented my life has become, and I think that would have happened in any field. And
yeah,
so there's a saying, right? If you're a boss and you have to decide between giving work to a person who's already has a lot of work and someone who's completely free, who
Yeah.
would you give it to? You would give it to the person who already has work because they know how to manage time and do the work well. The guy who's free doesn't have work because he can't do the work. So I think when you're optimally engaged in the kind of work that you're doing is when you do everything fine. Now, if you're free for 15 days, you have to do only one task, you will drag your heels and do it in the last day and not do it well.
Yeah.
But you have 15 to go on 15 days.
Yeah.
You'll make sure you do one thing every day and do it well, because you're left with no other option. So it's a very it's a psychological thing that goes on in that sense.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. You have a very, especially I didn't appreciate then, but the way you explained the division between transaction part and disputes was brilliant, man. Like your clarity. I think इतनी clarity तो मुझे भी नहीं थी यार, और I have interned so much. All right. So okay, now just moving on to the last question of this segment. How has the work changed in COVID, and the firm culture? And do you feel like a robot sometimes? Just like you're, because all that socializing is gone. You're just getting work from someone. So how are the meetings like and things like that? During COVID.
Okay, this is very interesting, and it might take a little time to answer.
Yeah,
this.
please go ahead.
So let's talk about the legal industry, right? Lawyers thrive on meeting people and working together,
Yes.
collaborating. More so in litigation and less in law firms.
Yeah.
So that's always been the type of people in law firms, that why don't you allow us to work from home, right? At least a couple of days a week, so that we can manage our affairs at home and be productive at the same time.
Yeah.
So like work from home perpetually is bad because it leads to reducing productivity and whatnot. But research has shown in other fields, that in IT and services and everything else, that if you allow people flexible time, they become more productive, right?
Yeah.
And a firm which is huge on margins should look at that. But there's always been a taboo against working from home. I think that has changed with COVID. In fact, my firm didn't have facilities for working from home. Like they didn't have the IT infrastructure,
Yeah.
but that thing was set up within a week of this lockdown being imposed. So we got an off 1 week before the national lockdown started, the Maharashtra lockdown started. In that 1 week, they calibrated their IT systems to allow us working from home.
Yeah.
So that's one good thing that's come out of it, that eventually, once offices reopen, I think law firms, after having evaluated how productive employees become,
Yeah.
they will allow employees or
Yeah.
lawyers to work from home,
Or
which I
some
think is
people,
very important.
or some people will get fired. That will be damn funny because they'll be so unproductive at home. Yeah.
Yeah. But that firing thing doesn't happen because the attrition rate in law firm is so high. Popular joke going around that if you stick 10 years in a law firm, you'll make partner.
Yeah.
And that's true because people just leave because they can't deal with the constant pressure. Even if you become partner, you're going to work with your associates at 2, 3 in the night, morning, whatever you want to call it. So life is hard in the law firm, and it doesn't get simpler.
Yeah.
But
why is that?
So
Why
that
is
is
that, Anirudh? But I don't understand, because I was also at a tier 1 recently, and I really didn't understand why do you create a culture, right? You create a culture of work, and why is the environment so stressful? Also, when there is so much stress, because some people can't handle it, you inherently become rude. I remember, I don't know, my mom called me one day, and this is the second week of internship. I was rude to her unnecessarily because I saw everyone around me was rude to everyone. Because the moment you're under your pressure, you're rude, you're shouting at your interns, things like that. Why is that? Is there a solution?
Of course, there is a solution. So you need a good culture in the organization to deal with how people deal with pressure.
Yeah.
A lot of people deal with stress in different ways. Some people erupt. Some people become completely silent.
People abusing each other on phone, and I earlier thought it's a movie thing, it's not true, but it's true, man. The whole boss culture, the pressure culture is true.
Yeah. So in a law firm especially, it's not, how do you say? So in a normal corporate setup, you'll have one CEO, who'll have like 5 departments, 5 department heads, people are. So ultimately there's one boss.
Yeah.
Correct. In a law firm, every partner is given a free hand to deal with their people working in the team and their clients in whichever way they like. Yeah. So I might be working in a law firm with 100 other people.
Yeah.
In a normal organization, say if I was working in Infosys, I might have to deal with 100 people. But here I deal with only people in the 6, 7 people in my team, including my boss. And I report only to my boss. So
Exactly.
that way, the onus is on your manager or your partner to see what kind of culture that they want to imbue in their team. Some partners who themselves become riled up when they're stressed, and that passes down to the team.
Yeah.
This happens even at home. Your father or mother in a bad mood, you are in a bad mood,
Yeah.
right? There are some bosses who deal with pressure better,
Yeah.
right? They might not erupt. They might say, okay, let's take a step back, see what we can focus on right now to get the work.
Yeah.
So that's that. But and also how firms operate right now. If work from home eventually is allowed,
Yeah.
the partners might also be chill. They might be worried about something at home and them not being able to go home
Yes.
and meet their kids. But if they could work from home, they could manage things
Yeah.
that they want to do, right? So, yeah, so law firms being introduced to work from home is a good thing that's come out of COVID. So this is one aspect of it, the work and work culture and how it might change. Second thing about whether work will be impacted. So definitely, if the economy is going down,
Yeah.
so will our work, because there'll be less people willing to invest money in India
Yeah.
because our clients are mostly foreign funds who
Yeah.
want to come. Our work will reduce, so no one will want to invest in a travel company, correct? Because travel companies are going down. But similarly, people will want to invest in a pharma company because they'll have to start generating drugs in this time. And that's one of the few businesses that's going up, pharma and FFC. In fact, I'm working on a pharma deal right now, which
Yeah.
is keeping me very busy. The other thing you'll see is a lot of people, a lot of companies will go down
Yeah.
because of the economic impact of coronavirus. So we might get a lot of restructuring and insolvency work, which
Yeah.
we are prepared to work on. So in the short term, work will go down, but in the long term, by long term I mean more than after 6-8 months, work will resume at its normal pace,
Yeah.
even if you're working from home, and we might probably end up working more than we usually do
Yeah.
because it will become stressful and margins will be affected. So
Yeah.
clients will expect us to deliver more value for less money. So
Yeah.
for the same thing that the firm could charge say 100 rupees, client will now want it for 80 rupees. So,
Yeah.
so lawyers will also have to reorient themselves and say, okay, how do I deliver the same amount of value with less that I'm getting?
Yeah.
So lawyers are not immune to the uh, economy going down. We will be affected as well, but maybe not as much as a migrant laborer. We will still have work, but we'll have different challenges.
That's true. No, because I think even the contractual disputes will just, I don't know, plummet. Like there will be too much. All right, that's a good one segment. All right, so now moving on to the second segment, Anirudh. So you told me that you find IBC very interesting in solvency work, and LNL is one of the leading firms working in IBC. So can you tell me some interesting cases that you've been part of? I've heard that LNL was part of the landmark SR judgment. Did you happen to work on that?
Yeah, of course. In fact, my first week that, in fact, as soon as I started working, the first thing I was working on was the SR Steel matter.
Okay.
So, to give a little background to your listeners, SR Steel was a company which owed a lot of money to the banks,
Yeah.
and they were one of the first 12, or the dirty dozen as they called, um, referred by the RBI to mandatorily go resolution under the insolvency and bankruptcy code.
Yeah.
And SR Steel fetched, I think, some 48,000 crores by ArcelorMittal and Nippon Steel uh, consortium, who invested that money into the company, and they bought it. Of course, there were a lot of legal challenges going on, and when I came in, the NCLAT judgment had just come out.
Yeah.
Post that, the Supreme Court judgment came out, and a lot of things happened. And there were lots of issues. We won't discuss the legal issues, but
Yeah.
my takeaway was that as soon as I started working, the first thing was put on was this matter. So imagine, like, you just graduated from law school and you work on a $5.5 billion deal, and
Yeah.
how does that make you feel? Like, that made me. I might be doing a very small thing, and like it's such a big and complex deal, there are hundreds of lawyers working on this. But just to be a part of that deal was something exciting, and I
Yeah.
learned a lot in the process, because when the deal is big, pressure is high. There's no better way. So one thing I think I forgot to add when I was talking about my experience. is that the first couple of years of you working in any field, say it's a law firm or a litigation law office that you're working in, the more you work, the more you learn and absorb. You're like a sponge in your first couple of years.
Yes.
You tend to learn the most.
Yeah.
So I think I'm glad I was put into a high stress situation right in the beginning. So not only does it prime me to work like that if I have to in the future, but also I get to learn a lot of things quickly,
Yeah.
which is something I really enjoy.
Yeah. Plus, working in a tier one earlier, I used to have, because I had that socialist mindset that these law firms are capitalistic and they're trying to they charge so much, they don't do work. But then I realized tier one law firms are necessary. Because if a client comes with 10 issues, for example, today, if I'm representing a tech giant, so I will have competition law issues, I will have insolvency, I have 10 issues, right? So, number one is that is important. And especially the kind of cases you get to work on, like straight after graduating, is just crazy. I don't think so. If you would have worked under a, lawyer, हो सकता है कि SR type का judgment, like you wouldn't have been a part of it. But yeah, I think if someone is looking for that kind of experience, I think it's a brilliant place to work.
Yeah, correct. And you might think everything happened at the courts or tribunals.
Yeah.
There's so much background. Like we had drafted the resolution plan
Yeah.
for ArcelorMittal. So we were acting on behalf of ArcelorMittal and Nippon Steel of Japan, who were the joint bidders for SR Steel India. Now that came with its own set of challenges.
Yeah.
You had to deal with other law firms. So in typically an IBC deal, you have the acquirer, the bidders council, then the resolution professional will have their own counsel.
Yeah.
I think JSK did that for in the SRC matter, and the committee of creditors has its own set of lawyers. Then the other party is challenging. Like I remember the Ruiyas and the promoters of SRC had so many issues with us, and they were causing a lot of litigation hurdles.
Yeah.
Basically, effectively block the deal.
Yeah.
We came out of it. That's something I'm really proud that I was exposed to right in my first year.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that was the most interesting thing that I worked on. To work on in my first day, since day one.
Yeah.
We're still dealing with issues of fallout of integrating the company and the vertical supply chain, say the mines and ports. It's a steel company, right? At the end of the day, it's just not just a company. You need power supply, you need coal, you need mining of that coal, you need ports to transport the steel. There's so many issues. Like till you actually start working, you don't realize, wow, the world is big and there's so many things that you deal with.
Yeah. That's a good insight. Anirudh, one also very interesting part, and that I think is the law student in you that comes out of is your your enthusiasm regarding tech law, especially crypto assets. And it's not just like you read about it, you also write about it. And especially you write for leading newspapers, you wrote for Economic Times, you have a published paper. And this is back when no one was talking about it. Like this is you being a genuine enthusiast. So, all right. So now have you had the chance to go through the judgment, the recent one?
Of course, I've read it.
Yeah. So what is your takeaway? Do you think they did anything wrong or things like that? I'll ask specific questions later, but what is your roundup on
it? Okay, so not to be pedantic, but let's take a step back and see what happened.
Wait, let me first Google what is pedantic. Sorry.
No, don't be a lawyer.
So, let's take a step back and see what actually transpired. Okay.
Yeah.
So there was a crypto burst, right? Bubble back in 2014 or 15, is it?
15.
15. When cryptocurrency reached its peak, I think $21,000 for one Bitcoin.
That was 2017. That
correct.
No.
Where 2017.
People were billionaires in one night, and and then RBI comes out with a notification with regard to banks they can't deal with.
Right. So that came very much later. So let's chart the timeline of how it regulated.
Yeah.
So RBI they released papers right from I think 2011 cautioning people not to deal in cryptocurrency because they have consumer protection, tax, money laundering, drug running, terrorism, financing issues, and you might get scammed and all. So all please don't deal with it. Then RBI also said they are not money. We don't recognize them as money or currency.
Yes,
Therefore, we do not have the power to regulate it
exactly.
or to ban. So this happened right from 2011
Yeah.
to even 17, where they were only passive spectators to see people being billionaires and whatnot.
Yeah.
And in 2018, they suddenly say that we have maintained throughout that we do not have the power to regulate it, but we perceive our regulated entities, which are the banks,
Yeah.
might face adverse effects because of people dealing in cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
So we are banning banks from dealing with cryptocurrency exchanges
Yeah.
because it will affect them. So it was a ban couched as a protection for their regulated entities, which are banks.
Yeah.
Right. Even in the Supreme Court, the RBI maintained the same thing.
Yeah.
That we do not have the power to do it, and we have only told banks to not to deal with it.
Yeah.
Then basically, the Supreme Court, these are the Supreme Court's words. Okay, they
But
said
they accepted it. No, but they said it's money, right? Because everyone argued there, both the sides, that no, it is not money. Because if I'm not wrong, because even the internet and mobile, I think organized association was like,
IMI.
they were,
It's not money.
it's a security, there's a commodity. So
Correct. So let's come to that. Supreme Court didn't actually say that it's money. Okay. I'll tell you how they came at it. First, they said that by telling banks not to deal in cryptocurrency, you've effectively you're doing something indirectly, which you don't want to do directly.
yes,
Correct. You know that it's a maximum law. You cannot do something indirectly that you can't do directly.
Yeah.
Right. And the court will strike it down. So they said, no, this is a ban on cryptocurrency. Okay. And what people don't realize is that the Supreme Court did the RBI a favor by overturning the ban, because what they said, right? So they didn't say it's money actually. They said it has the effect of affecting the monetary policy and the monetary framework in India because of how crypto assets work, which is why the RBI, under the Banking Regulation Act, the RBI Act, and the Payment and Settlement Systems Act, has the power to regulate cryptocurrency. So the RBI cannot come and say that we don't have the power to do anything. We are just asking the banks not to do it.
Yeah.
They said, no, it's our job to do it. Right?
Yeah.
In that sense, they said that why they are overturning the ban is because everyone has the right to freedom to profess their trade under Article 19(1).
Yeah.
Correct. So then they said that you have not shown us any demonstrable harm that it has caused. You are saying harm will be caused to banks, but you've not shown us even one instance where banks are being caused any harm.
Yeah.
Second, you do not show us anything that you could have done which would have been more proportional to the current problems in the ban.
Yes.
So the Supreme Court said you have the power to do it, even ban it, if the circumstances call for it.
Yeah.
So we could see. So what they've done is the Supreme Court basically opened the doors for RBI to regulate cryptocurrency. They're saying you can't wash your hands of this. This is the RBI's responsibility. You have to regulate it. And there's no way by saying we're banning it, so we don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
It is the problem, you deal with it. Does not mean you ignore the problem.
Yeah.
And they also came hard on government authorities. They're saying if there are money laundering issues, if there are tax issues, so on and so forth, then let those authorities do their jobs. Why do you want to shoot a gun at the back of the RBI and next you kill 3-4 birds with one stone? If there are issues, you regulate it. A ban is not the solution.
It's just
not the solution.
Yeah. Also, interestingly, I met the person responsible for the RBI notification. The secretary working in the RBI, he came for a lecture. And we asked him, and he gave his full logic. He gave that how. And if someone doesn't have in-depth knowledge of the subject, they will agree with him also. And he said, because we didn't have ways to regulate it, we banned it. So that was his defense, which is essentially, it's quite dumb.
The Supreme Court said they can't do, right? They exactly said this.
Yeah. So, and then funny enough, have you read the bill? Have you read the Virtual Currencies Committee Interministerial?
Yeah.
So the bill proposes digital currency, right? Why does it propose digital currency? They say that India will have its official digital currency, will be separate of the rupee. that because China is doing it and all these countries. So I outrightly asked him. I said, "You only have one enabling section, which gives the RBI power to, introduce a digital currency. So, but how will that work? What is the man? Because will you have an exchange rate between rupee and that digital currency?" He said, "All of that wasn't contemplated. We just we just put in a section because China was doing it in other countries, so we thought we should at least have the provision for it." I said, "Sure, sir." That is what my point is, that when your knowledge of the subject matter is so less, you have to have experts, and to have experts in India also is tough in that situation. You have to have people very tech oriented, and your article, especially your journal article in the LexisNexis journal, it I don't know, but it very nicely traces the history of cryptocurrencies in India in terms of regulation, and I think it's a must read for anyone who's watching and wants to exactly understand the pre-judgment scenario. But
No,
yeah,
yeah, thanks for that. What I'd like to say is that in most government authorities, very little thought goes into what they are doing.
exactly.
Like no one's an expert, but because they just want to make a committee. So
Yeah.
they had no reasons to ban it.
Yes.
And similarly, they had no reasons to suggest a digital currency. In fact, this is 2019 where they said complete ban.
Yeah.
In 2018, there is a bill which is not very well known, which
Okay.
said that we should allow regulated trading.
Okay.
And the Supreme Court pointed this out as well. How is it that within 1 year, you
Yeah.
completely changed your stance? In 2018 saying regulation to 2019 saying ban. Because in the meanwhile, because of the RBI ban which was there, no developments have taken place for you to change it.
Yeah.
So if the status was maintained, what suddenly happened that you said from regulation we go to complete ban,
Yeah.
which is quite the
Yeah.
problem.
Also, now coming on to your Economic Times article, you spoke about you wrote about taxation. You said there can be 12 to 18% taxation on total revenue or on the transaction fee that the all these crypto asset exchanges. So how will that exactly work? Because you see, you can buy and trade in cryptocurrency simply using a VPN, and no one on the planet can catch you. As simple as that. No one knows the place of origin. You can put your money in your PayPal account and just transact whatever you want to. And that is what that's my question is also. Because also, if you don't have the infrastructure to regulate something, isn't the argument that even if only 1% of the money being transacted can be used for wrong purposes, isn't that a justification enough to ban it? I'm just putting it out there, for you to.
Yeah, you're playing devil's advocate. That's completely fine.
Yeah.
See, there are problems with your traditional currency as well, right?
Yeah.
Who's saying the Indian rupee, like demonetization?
Yeah.
Right? They said terrorists are printing their money, which is why it's one of the reasons we are doing it.
Yeah.
We are demonetizing those 500,000 people.
Yeah.
So this stuff happens even with traditional currency, right?
Yes.
So just because you don't have a regulatory framework right now, does not mean you can't work on it, right? So all your concerns. Firstly, all crypto assets cannot be lumped into one category, right?
Yeah.
So there are completely anonymous cryptocurrencies. There are semi-anonymous cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is the example of a semi-anonymous cryptocurrency, right? Now, the idea should be, for example, if I were to suggest a model, if the government is skeptical, have a white list of services which allow you to trade in cryptocurrency and ban everything else. Correct? They say only entities registered with the RBI to allow cryptocurrency trading can allow people to do it. That's one way. I think that's a little strict, but that's one way to do it, right? And once you have that infrastructure in place, then you can think about taxation.
Yeah.
And taxation comes last. So on your 12 to 18% thing, so the idea was simple. I think that so if I want to buy one Bitcoin from you for 100 rupees, right? This the exchanges we are doing on ZepPay, they might charge me 2% commission at 2 rupees. Right?
Yeah.
So I effectively pay 102 rupees to ZepPay, and they give 100 to you, 2 rupees they keep. Correct? So will that tax be applicable on 2 rupees or the entire 100 rupees?
Yeah.
Is what my thought was. Now, if it's on the entire 100 rupees, then tax would be 18 rupees rather than your 36 paise on the 2 rupees. Correct? At 18%.
Yeah.
So, and it's seen like, if the government, without banning something, the government can greatly discourage something with high taxation. Now, tomorrow, alcohol has high taxes. Why? Because the government doesn't want you to drink.
Yeah.
In fact, India has one of the highest taxes on alcohol in the world.
Yes.
You can get a beer for cheaper in Europe or in the US
Yeah.
because we have high import duties, we have high state VAT, excise duties on alcohol. So taxation has always been used as a tool
Yeah.
to modify the behavior of consumers. If
Yeah.
the same thing becomes more expensive, then demand goes up. If it becomes cheaper, then demand goes
Yeah.
up.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if you start charging, not that I'm advocating it, but if you start charging 18% on the entire transaction value,
Yeah.
then that will greatly reduce people wanting to do it because the transaction costs are so high.
Yeah.
So you are doing it, you're not banning it, but you're regulating it with a very heavy hand.
Yeah.
Something I don't profess, but something that they could do.
Yeah.
Because there are multiple advantages to government. If you don't regulate it, it's going to happen anyway, like you said, through a VPN.
Yeah.
If you regulate it, you'll make sure that your terrorism financing, drug running, and other concerns you have are not happening. Second, you get so much tax revenue out of it,
Yeah.
which is another reason people say to legalize gambling.
Yeah.
Because people are doing it in backrooms anyway. You bring in tax revenue,
Yeah.
and you see how much is exactly happening, and you protect the vulnerable societies with effective regulation.
Exactly. And one very interesting point that was made in the report of separating blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and to which even Supreme Court goes ahead, and Supreme Court said that there's nothing wrong with appreciating one technology and things like that. But can you really separate cryptocurrencies and blockchain?
Yeah, of course. Like I thought about this. Blockchain is the currency on which Bitcoin runs.
Yeah.
Now, even during the ban, the government employed blockchain. I think Maharashtra and Andhra Pradesh governments
The
were
contract.
doing some they were
Yeah.
doing some system where they were tracing land records
Yeah.
with blockchain technology.
Yeah.
So it is possible to separate it. Of course, you regulate crypto assets, but blockchain, because of how effective the distributed ledger technology works,
Yeah.
there are so many applications. Like you have supply chain managements that can be done.
Yes.
For example, this is being done in other countries in the world. Like, how do you make sure that the food that reaches you is fresh?
Yeah.
Correct. Now, something moves from farm A to farm B to farm C.
Yeah.
Right? In a truck. How much quantity of vegetables went from A to B, from B to C can be there on the ledger, and
Yeah.
how much the consumer is getting at point D
Yeah.
can be put on the blockchain, right?
Exactly.
Also, if some food is expired, that can be put on the blockchain.
Yeah.
Right? So, blockchain effectively allows you to trust strangers
Yeah.
because you have a record of all the transactions that are happening.
Exactly.
Without getting extremely technical on blockchain,
Yeah.
the idea is that because everyone has a record of all transactions,
Yeah.
is the reason why people will be able to trust something that they get.
Yeah.
Or some records that are maintained. Now there are millions of applications of blockchain. This is one example that I took. So
Yeah.
in short, yes, it is possible to separate crypto assets in blockchain.
Yeah.
And probably should be done as well. I don't see that as being a necessarily bad idea.
All right. That's a very good insight, and honestly, I try to find people who I can have this discussion with, because not a lot of people are interested in this. Because I think I think TMT is something that is really going to take off. I think especially next 5 years, I think it's going to be the new arbitration. Yeah. I was talking to someone, like, I think your batch only, right? So when you came in, arbitration was the it thing. We get into arbitration thing. Yeah, and a lot of people, we'll do wills and things like that. All right, then, Anirudh, anything else you want to talk about at the end? Anything else that you think I have missed or anything?
No, dude, like I think this was like a really comprehensive
Yeah.
podcast interview, and you certainly grilled me a lot more than what my bosses have
No,
in the
come on.
right since my interview. And yeah, I appreciate you taking out the time to do this and productively engaging yourself in something during lockdown. And it has given me also something to look forward to. Like
Right.
you know, like today, it would have been any other Saturday sleeping through the day, but I look forward to something interesting, new.
Thanks a lot.
Nothing to add apart from the fact that stay safe, stay home, and we are all in this battle against COVID together.
All right, it's a wrap.
No! Don't be a lawyer. What about human rights law? No money, no